Adekunle Gold, AGBB.
No, Bad Boy Deks. Bad Boy Deks. Well, don't one of them, sha.
But Adekunle had Adekunle had the most interesting transition. But who was he at the beginning? Who was he at the start?
It was this guy that was doing covers. Some very interesting covers, right? But at the very start, I remember some of the earliest songs that he released. They were kind of pop records. So it was this guy who, it was different. Like this was the second wave, or no, it was the third wave of contemporary Nigerian pop music, right? Like the Wizkids, the Davidos, the Burna Boy, Tiwa Savage, Olamide, all of them had happened. Then it was the Kiss Daniel, it was the Techno, Runtown, Pato Rankin, Jamie Alade kind of as well. But nobody really expected. Kiss Daniel is sort of cut from the same cloth, right? The vocal texture is the same. Both of them, if they had existed like 20 years prior, they might have been Fuji or Akbala artists, right? Or Juju artists, possibly. His voice stood out. The way his voice, it was like a rara singer. Someone that was Yoruba was to say something. That was something like his voice was. In a lot of ways, him and Kiss Daniel are like maybe the earliest prototype, or the pseudo earliest prototype, or the mid-range prototype for people like Bella Shmurda or Orisha Femi was kind of like their OG, so to speak. Or maybe we'll go a little further. We're looking at people like some Adekunle boys and all that. But Orisha Femi, in terms of like the pop era, Orisha Femi was sort of the first one. Then Kiss Daniel and maybe Adekunle Gold. But the thing is, Adekunle Gold, Kiss Daniel was making pop records, right? Was making Afro pop records, like African percussion, all that. But Adekunle Gold, his first single was a One Direction cover, right? Shadi? That one, and he was just different. Then from there, he transitioned into this guy that was making folk and traditional pop music. Like, his music wasn't exactly like anybody else's music. Even though at the time as well, Davido had released a record like Aye, that was a huge record. Runtown had released a record like Gallardo, just sort of cut off this traditional pop record. But Adekunle Gold's own was just different. At the start, bro, ladies loved the voice. Bro, you couldn't tell them anything. The women loved it, and it was kind of a no-brainer that it got some attention. Basically, it was a no-brainer.
Interesting. But who was he on Gold?
The debut album. By the Gold album, he found who he was. He knew what it was going to be. But at the time, people were calling him alternative. Maybe it was alternative in the sense that people couldn't find a description for it. But what it was folk and it was traditional pop. To a large extent. So, by the time he was breaking out of who he was, people were forced to take notice of who he was. So you couldn't, like the records that he was dropping at the time, you couldn't but listen to them. And that was a simple thing.
How about 30?
About 30 was sort of where people started doubting Adekunle Gold. Like, people had experienced it, so the excitement and the newness had sort of worn off. And people were getting more critical of the album. And it also didn't help that the album had some kinks here and there. Some things that he could have cut out, some things that he could have changed. But still, he had hits on the album, right? But the thing about 30 was this. He had a record like Ire, for example. Ire, which was, that's possibly his best song ever, possibly. In terms of like singles, it's possibly his best song ever. But he himself has said that his biggest song ever is Okay. With About 30 it was sort of the point where people crowned him as this Sunny Ade type, a modern Sunny Ade type character, right? It wasn't exactly fair, but he also sort of embodied it. But by the time he had also perfected his stagecraft, he had become a really good with his band, this fourth element. Like with his band, alongside his band, he had become this guy that you could call him for events. I remember seeing him perform at Celebration in 2019 and losing my mind. Like, it was really good. And he had this cap thing going, like Sonny Ade, all of these things that people were clamoring for an Adekunle Gold and Sonny Ade album or a record. It wasn't the finest thing, right? But the thing is, if about 30 hadn't happened, Adekunle Gold might have been pigeonholed into who he was, and he might not have realized they need to evolve early enough. So in a way, about 30 was a blessing in disguise for him. Technically, that's what it was.
Interesting. When and why did this transformation take place?
The transformation started taking place around Before You Wake Up. Adekunle Gold will tell you that it changed because he always had it in his mind to go back to his roots, right? To him, his roots has always been pop music. That's what he says. That's what it tells you. But for us, even though Sade is sort of built on the One Direction sound, right? Which was essentially pop music. Afro pop is also something different. What sets Afro pop aside is the formation of the music. You can't listen to American pop or Eastern European pop music or EDM or Eurodance, whatever, or dubstep and confuse it with Afro pop. Afro pop is different. The formation is different. The drum patterns are different. The sonic progression is different. The sonics, the melodies are different. The construction of melodies are different. All these things are different. All sounds have their peculiarities, right? So you might at the time, yes, go back to pop, yes, but Afro pop is a different ballgame entirely. We had seen him do pop. For example, a record like Pick Up is not exactly traditional folk record. It was an Afro pop record, right? But at the time, the brand was still into this traditional pop folk thing. So what it needed to change exactly wasn't just the sound to become something that modern Nigeria and younger audiences. For example, Reminisce sampled Omode Meta on his single Alaye Toshigogo some days ago. Some Gen Z kids didn't know it, right? You get what I mean? They had no idea. They're like, what song is that? I'm like, so we are old. Wow. You understand? So a lot of people didn't experience the traditional folk era. They might have heard Sonny Ade passively, but they were not immersed in the culture. They were not nurtured by the culture like we were, by high life and some of these other sounds. So the sound, he needed to endear himself towards a new audience with a different sound. Now, it had to happen. Why it happened, he says he has the thing, but a lot of people were critical. They wanted him to change. They needed something new. Like, every moment maxes out, right? Artists evolve. For example, I've said this several times on this show, Madonna's 1996 album was a hip-hop album. Go and listen to it. Do you know why? Madonna is the queen of pop. She's famed as the queen of pop, right? But by the mid-90s, do you know the sound that was the most trending, the sounds that were the most trending in the world? They were not the biggest. At the time, rock and roll was still huge, right? Some later parts of like New Jack Swing, electro pop were still big. Some types of pop were big. But pop needed to evolve, needed to become something else. We had not seen the people like Britney Spears. They were to come later in the decade, and boy bands and people like from places like Sweden, the Backstreet Boys. They were different. They were not exactly. They were a refined version of pop. For example, you listen to their album Millennium. It's different from what Madonna was doing in the 80s, right? So she had to change it because she needed to do something different. When people listen to you for long enough, you tend to expire. It's just what it is. So he needed to switch it. It's just such a shame that he switched it after just 2 albums. Most people still have 3-4 albums to do it. But he had just 2 albums. But did he change it? Yes, he did.
How important were tracks like Jury, Kelebe Megbe, and Young Girl?
The first track that were things where people started to notice a difference was Before You Wake Up. Before You Wake Up was the moment. Before You Wake Up was the turning point. Jury is an unfortunate sacrificial lamb. Jury and Kelebe Megbe especially. Kelebe Megbe is a really good record.
I love that record.
It's a really, really good record, right? But it was just so. Here's how fans think. Music fans usually are very fragmented in terms of ideology, in terms of what they represent, in terms of what they think. There are some Adekunle Gold fans still now who don't want the new Adekunle Gold, right? But after like high, the numbers are reducing like at an accelerated rate. But at the time, when fans have an idea of what you are, if you try to do something different, they will try to tell you changed. That's why people who were making hip-hop records, right? like strictly hip hop, boom bap, they're hardcore, speaking about the streets. The moment you go to start singing, people are going to criticize it. For example, when BBNaija wanted to record Juice, I remember watching something where it was saying, man, why am I sampling an R&B record on the hip hop? Like, nah, man, I'm not doing this. The streets will laugh at me. But someone said, Diddy told him that people are going to laugh at you all the way to the charts and to the bank. And it did happen, yes. So sometimes, fans are very reluctant in terms of they usually don't want artists to change. It's unfortunate and it's so sad. Fans are not open-minded. They think they are, but they are not. But usually what artists do is, especially when they execute it properly, what you also realize is fans don't know what they want until you give it to them, especially when it's good. So what happened with Adekunle Gold was why records like Jore and Kelebe were sacrificial lambs was they came too early. If Adekunle Gold were to release Jore after High with Kiss Daniel, bruh, it would have been a different thing entirely. A different ball game entirely. But the thing is, at the time, those records also needed to be sacrificial lambs. They needed to happen for Adekunle Gold to be able to get to where he is. And also at the time, what he was doing was, he was finding himself. Like, transitioning, there are no rules to this thing. Even now, the worst part about Nigerian music is that there are no rules. People are creating their own rules. There's no template, there is no model. You are creating yourself by your own rules. You are creating your own rules by yourself. If it works, fine. If it doesn't work, people are going to criticize you. But the least you can do is go as hard as you can. So what Adekunle Gold was doing at the time was, he was finding what was going to work. He was looking for it. But at the time, a record like Young Love was kind of instructive to the direction it took when with Afropop Volume 1. But Kelebe and Jure, they came slightly too early.
So what moment did things start to stick for?
Something different. Something different was the moment. Something different was a turning point. Something different came on this sound, this Wizkid-esque mid-tempo sound. When you look at listen to that song, it could have easily been a Wizkid sound. But the good thing about it was the songwriting. The songwriting was fantastic. Like what it was saying on the record, the progression. It finally got like the progression of a pop star, even though it was delivered in English, right? It was the moment where a lot of people sat back and thought, maybe this Adekunle Gold thing is good, or maybe we could actually gain some things from it. His appearance had also started to change, if you remember. Before he had this Afro thing going, but by the time he was doing something different, he had like big hair or bigger hair. He had earrings, he had jewelry, he was more buff, he was going shirtless a lot, all these things, right? So the transition was very intentional. But the thing about Adekunle Gold is you can't, when it didn't feel like, most people don't know how to execute such transition. And it's even hard to execute it in Nigeria. It's very tough, bro. It's very tough. Like, you see Billie Eilish, for example. Billie Eilish going from a debut album and a debut EP to a sophomore album. It's not been easy. It's had good numbers, but you look at it critically, it's not exactly been the same. So when you look at Billie Eilish, for example, going from a debut album and a debut EP to a sophomore album, it's not exactly been the easiest transition. Like, she was this gothic, avant-garde teen. Now they have sort of made that like a symbol of American sexuality by the sophomore album, like Marilyn Monroe, basically. Blonde hair, shiny blonde hair, a lot of cleavage, a lot of push-up bras, a lot of skin, so to speak. So going from that to this, they are trying to switch the brand. It's not exactly been going as planned yet, but you know that that's going to work. You look at Chloe, from Chloe and Hailey as well, like going from this pop R&B girl group to they want to make her into this pop princess. It's going too fast, but you have to see what the transition is. So it's very easy to switch, especially when you're at the public eye. It's very hard to switch. So with Adekunle Gold, something different was very important. It made people sit back to take notice that, okay, let's see what you're doing. It also ushered in something very important. AG Baby. Ushered in AG Baby. AG Baby was, when you look at it, looking back at a lot of things, I'm going to say for a fact that the album might have been better titled AG Baby instead of Afropop Volume 1. AG Baby would have been a better description for the moment, not just for the album. Yeah, Afro pop, right? But AG Baby would have been a better representation of the experience that album project, because it wasn't Adekunle Gold anymore. Like, it wasn't Adekunle Gold that came on Sade, Ire, Pick Up, all those records, right? It was AG Baby. Like, the ladies wanted him more. He had gone to something that a lot of ladies love. He had this sex symbol thing going on, right? Even though he was married, he's still married. Please leave him alone. He has a child as well, right? Please, thank you, right? So he had those things going on, but it became, AG Baby is a different thing to Adekunle Gold. Just like Bad Boy Deks is different from AG Baby. It's different, it's three different phases that a lot of people need to chat, right? So AG Baby was moments where he was in his pop bag. The sound on that album was heavily influenced by electronic music, EDM. Like a record like Sabina or even something different in a way. AG Baby, okay. AG Baby the track, then okay, the record, right? Those records were heavily influenced by electronic music, heavily. Like, a few years from now, we're going to see a lot of sounds like that. That sound is coming. And I think a lot of people need to take note of it. You need to take note, and that's FactsOnly. That sound is coming. But on that album, releasing the new album makes a lot of people realize that lyrically, at the time, it was sufficient for us. One of my favorite albums ever. I love that album, right? This is not about my opinion, but I'm just stating my opinion. I love the album. So, but looking back at that album, with what he's saying on this current album, Catch Me If You Can, he didn't exactly say much on that album. He was just finding his feet. That album is going to be remembered more for the sound and for his voice and the way and for his technique, not as much for what he was saying. AG Baby, yes, he was saying something. Okay, yeah, he was saying something. But when you listen to some other records on this new album, you're going to realize that he wasn't saying anything on that album. He wasn't really saying much.
What was Afro Pop Volume 1 able to achieve for Adekunle?
Afro Pop Volume 1 was stabilized him. It steadied the ship. So you look at Something Different. You remember after Something Different, it was on Pami? Yeah. Pami was also an important moment because it was with the rave of the moment and the growth of the modern era. That's Whiskey and Normally on the same record, right? And the verse was very good. Somebody call the popo, I've hate to record it. You understand, right? When you look at it, the cadence that he found on Pami and Something Different is basically the cadence that he's running with on this Catch Me If You Can album. Like the flow, somebody call the popo, oh Lord of mercy, mercy. It's very, very similar, right? The flow on OK is slightly different. The cadence on OK is slightly different. Or AG Baby, or give me that. All those things are very different. They're different from each other. So it was a moment that stabilized him in the public eye as a pop artist. That was what he achieved.
Were there weaknesses in this album? Afropop Volume 1.
Afropop Volume 1, maybe lyrically, looking back here, there were some lyrical depth. Like, it didn't have a lot of depth. It was saying things, but the topics were not very, the topics packed the punch, except maybe for records like, if I die for your love, die now, what I carry me go. Or a record like OK and AG Baby Again, or something different. So that's 4 out of 10 tracks. Not very persuasive. But when you compare it to this album, bro, Adekunle Gold, this is his most honest album. He's cocky. Like, Catch Me If You Can. Again, if I was to title this album, I would have titled it Bad Boy Deks. If that's me though. But Catch Me If You Can is also it's more of a suitable album title comparatively than Afropop was, instead of AG Baby. So Catch Me If You Can it's a state of mind. It feels like a star now. It feels like a pop star. He's settled. If that was stabilizing, he's settled now. He wants to experiment. He wants to say things. Have you listened to the album? Have you listened to the things he's saying? Like on the first track, he's telling you that, bro, I have a kid. You people didn't expect to see me here, but I'm here. I did for now. Then the second track is Win. I want to win. I'm here to win. Giving middle fingers to his critics on the final track, which is Catch Me If You Can. I was telling them, like, media people that are writing critics about me. Bro, Adekunle Gold wasn't doing all those things before. Very confrontational now. Saying things, giving it to you. Like the way it was describing sex on records like maybe Sinner, or a record like Sinner, for example, or Fire, that's FYE. The way it was discussing sex on some of those records. or the sound I was experimenting with on this album. Listen to the final moments of Catch Me If You Can. The guitar riffs, the producers was working with, the opening track, Fatoumata Diawara. It's a whole ass package, right? And the thing that this album presented was, it also presented like 2 personalities, maybe even 3. Like there was Adekunle Gold on the album, there was AG Baby on the album, there was Bad Boy Deks on the album. So Bad Boy Deks is the one that's confrontational, not very egotistical, right? He was saying a lot of things and it appeared to mean some of those things. AG Baby was some of the lover boy and some of those other things. Adekunle Gold is the daddy, was talking about his family, talking about God, talking about some of these other things. AG Baby was the one that was in love, that was talking about sex. So it's 3 personalities sort of on the same album, balancing each other out. That was what this album was, basically, long and short of it.
But did High cement this transition?
Oh, 1000%. If High was the moment where people stopped doubting the transition. A lot of people, until High, people thought it was going to fail. And High made a lot of people realize that Sinner was actually a hit record. High made people realize, because Sinner was there, even he probably realized that Sinner was a hit record after High dropped. People didn't realize it. Because it felt like High needed to drop because he needed a hit record, he needed a pop, he needed a hit record that could break the door open. But Sinner was, have you seen people where he's performing Sinner before? Bro, everybody is Sheba, and the hook of the record is so resonant. Sheba, oh Sheba, girl, you make me Sinner. You know what it is. So High, and the thing that made High special was not just because it sounded good. He also went back to Fuse, that produced on his first 2 albums. Fuse produced on Afropop, but Fuse produced High with the Fuse sound and with the electronic sound. Again, that's from Afropop. It carried over to High, right? And the things I was saying, it was the first time that Adekunle Gold said something and imputed it on an Adekunle Gold record in terms of like the pop transition that was in the zeitgeist. Love is not enough, baby, that's with Molo. That's what the pop star would say. Or Davido, wake up and jump start, I'll go chop. Like anytime everybody's waiting for those 2 places, right? So those moments was where Adekunle Gold really hacked it as a pop star.
Do you think this is his most honest album?
Yes, I actually think so, 1000%. There is no jokes. There is no question about that. Before, Adekunle Gold seemed to be singing about circumstantial things or things that he thought people wanted to hear as a pop artist, right? Or the more popular things: party, love, sex, inspiration. I want to make it in life, all that stuff. But now, he has dug deep into his own soul and brought out a different path that people have never seen, right? So you know when I said that it's an intersection of personalities, it was Adekunle Gold on this album, there was AG Baby and there was Bad Boy Deks. Adekunle Gold is more of the son, talking about his mother, talking about his journey, sentimental, talking about like his role as a child of God, referencing God like a few times, about 3 or 4 times on the album, right? And then AG Baby being the husband, talking about love, talking about sex, especially towards his wife. His marriage is in the public eye. His marriage almost felt like an impediment to his transition sometimes because people tend to have a problem believing like pop stars. Then you're talking about like Bad Boy Deks, who is, like I said, confrontational and all those things. This is the first time. I don't know if we'll get it. I hope we get it again. I hope we continue to see like these tidbits into Adekunle Gold's personality. The intersection, the thing that was the Achilles heel for the personality of Bad Boy Deks was more about Mashemi. Like it was more like opening track. This is win as is something. It got to the 3rd track. The record is titled Mashemi. Mashemi is don't make me misbehave. Basically, that's what it is. So it was like Mashemi, Eshu Mashemi. Do you understand? If I've been bragging, okay, now this is my moment to calm down. So it follows. The only thing that this album didn't have in different parts is that some records felt underproduced or undercooked here and there. For example, a record like Messi, even though there are Afrobeat parts that came later, was sort of a cement. A record like Mashimi, a record like Win, the hooks on those records might have been better delivered, some of these things. And even a record like Seller could have done with the feature. So there were these things here and there that could have been corrected. But overall, it's a really good album. And the personality and the way he built the personalities and made them have distinct personalities on them with different tracks. And sometimes they also intersected on different tracks. But it's very interesting, very interesting.
Are there Grammy dreams for this body?
Oh, 1000%, 1000%. 3 elements. One, the intro of the album, Fatoumata Diawara, Grammy-nominated Malian singer. you know what that is. Burna Boy did the same template with Twice as Tall. The first track, You Soon Do. Remember, Twice as Tall won a Grammy. The format of the albums made the Lagos influences were there. For example, the way he was using horns and instrumentation and all these things. Then the final track, then the way he sampled Ebenezer Obey on one song, sampled another Grammy nominee, Sonny Ade on the final track, Catch Me If You Can, right? Then the final track itself follows like a few Grammy winning templates. Most notably, Burna Boy on his album, that's Bank on It, the final track on his album. Then not Hand of God, Chance the Rapper, the final track on Coloring Book by Chance the Rapper. Very, very colorful, very choral, very musical, high caliber musicality. Adekunle Gold achieved it on Catch Me If You Can, which is the final track on this album, basically. So yes, there are definitely Grammy drips on this album, 1000%. 1000%. And that's FactsOnly.